Xtalks is the industry leader in connecting life science, food, healthcare, and medical device professionals. The Xtalks Life Science Podcast features insightful conversations with industry experts about all things pharma, biotech, and more.
Hello and welcome to the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. I'm Ayesha Rashid, Senior Life Science Journalist at Xtalks.com, and this week I'm delighted to introduce our special guest on the show today. With us, we have Dr. Mike Exton, who is the CEO and a director at Lexicon Pharmaceuticals, a company developing gene science-based medicines for serious chronic conditions, including diabetes. Lexicon is advancing a pipeline that includes therapies for chronic pain management for diabetic, peripheral neuropathic pain, as well as hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and broader cardiovascular conditions as well. Dr. Exton has served as CEO and a director at Lexicon Pharmaceuticals since July 2024. He previously served in executive leadership positions at Novartis, where he worked for 14 years, most recently as Cardiometabolism Therapeutic Head from 2022 to 2024. Prior to joining Novartis, Dr. Exton was Director of Business Development with Invida and spent 9 years with Eli Lilly Australia, where he held a variety of research, business development, and sales positions. Dr. Exton has a PhD in neuroscience from the University of Newcastle and a PhD in immunology as well from the University of Essen, Germany. To learn more about the work that Dr. Exton is leading at Lexicon, let's turn to him now. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
It's a great pleasure. Nice to be here.
Nice to meet you as well, and thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to the conversation about a very important field, diabetes, fields, under cardiometabolic diseases, and so really timely, very important spaces that you're leading work in, so really looking forward to learning more about it. But before delving right in, I'd like to learn a bit more about your journey in biopharma, in big pharma, companies like Novartis, Eli Lilly, and then what led you to ultimately take those experiences and helm Lexicon Pharmaceuticals now.
Yeah, that's great. And you gave a great introduction in your overview. So I really started my career like many folks as a scientist after doing my original PhD in Australia, and really was pursuing an academic career in Germany, looking to become a professor and continue my academic research and really bench science. And at the time, for a mixture of personal and professional reasons, my wife, who was with me there in Germany, and I decided to return home. And she was working for a pretty famous German biotech at the time called Qiagen, which all molecular biologists will know about. And it was really, I guess, that exposure that got me interested in the biosciences and coming into industry. And so it was an interesting transition from academia into pharmaceuticals, where originally I started doing some work in medical affairs, doing some clinical research, which made sense given my background, but pretty quickly sort of moved across a number of different roles that gave me a really fundamental understanding of the industry: supply chain, business development, finance, eventually into the commercial organization. And after spending a decade at Eli Lilly, had the opportunity to move to Novartis to really actually launch a medicine in multiple sclerosis, which is more my academic background and interest. And through, as you mentioned, 14 years at Novartis, really took on a number of leadership roles and had this leadership experience across Australia, Switzerland, Taiwan, where I was the general manager, and then coming to the US nearly 8 years ago to lead the cardiovascular division, which was Novartis's largest division in terms of people, about 2,000 people in the US organization, and really launched the medicine Entresto for heart failure. And it was at that time that I really grew a love and interest in cardiometabolic disease, because It was really underserved at the time. This is nearly a decade ago, and there wasn't a lot of pharmaceutical interest in cardiometabolic disease. In fact, many companies were getting out of that into oncology, in particular, immunology, and I'm really pleased to see the sort of renaissance of the cardiometabolic field. And now, clearly, with GLP-1s and other medicines for obesity, there's this great enthusiasm. And it was that sort of getting back to the cutting edge science that led me to Lexicon, and this opportunity to really drive forward some programs that were very unique. And For that reason, after a long tenure at Novartis, I moved over to Lexicon. It's been a little more than a year, lots of ups, a few downs, but making great progress in the pipeline for this small but mighty company.
That's so wonderful to hear. And as you mentioned, I like how you use the term that there's been a renaissance of sorts in the cardiometabolic field. And what do you think really has driven that? Of course, leading up to the GLP-1 drugs now. And so I think the perception traditionally has been over the last, couple of decades that diseases like diabetes are chronic diseases that can be managed, and so I think we're good with it. But what really has triggered sort of this renaissance that you've spoken of?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of factors. First, we're understanding the biology a lot better. I think there has been a lot of academic fundamental research to truly understand cardiometabolic biology, and that has revealed a number of new targets. There's been a number of new methodologies that have really expanded the potential platforms that can be used in cardiometabolic disease, whether it be CRISPR on the one extreme, if you like, through to gene silencing, through to monoclonals, obviously, small molecules. But importantly, it's really success begets success. And I think as we've seen new cardiometabolic medicines be launched well and be embraced by both physician and patient communities, then companies have seen that there's possibility for them to be successful in this area, and really, I guess, make the investment worthwhile, because typically cardiometabolic research is pretty expensive, because you're looking at large trials, long trials, often with outcomes that are very different to what you may face with a sort of short oncology based trial, where you can potentially even move from phase two directly into a marketing arrangement, into a commercial arrangement. So it's really, I think companies have seen that the risk and the investment pays off in the long term.
Indeed. And from your perspective and in your opinion, what are sort of some of the pressing unmet needs? We talk about unmet needs and things of that nature in cardiometabolic diseases today, as well as cardiovascular diseases in particular, and diabetes under that umbrella. And heart failure remains a leading cause of death worldwide. So that's a very obvious unmet need, of course. And so what today are really the most urgent issues in the space, and from a global health burden? And also, what do you see as the biggest challenges in the space, both from the disease perspective and drug development perspective as well?
Yeah. Look, it's that's a big question. Lots to say about that. I think, as you noticed, and as you noted, sorry, the cardiovascular disease is still the number one killer. It was still the number one killer even when COVID was unfortunately, resulting in huge mortality around the world. Uh, Cardiometabolic disease is the not only the number one killer, but the rates are increasing. So unlike the mortality as a result of cancer, which has been steadily dropping over the last few decades, in fact, in cardiometabolic disease, it continues to increase. That's driven by a number of factors. So, firstly, an aging population, which drives that. Secondarily, an increase in the level of obesity, diabetes, which has this inextricable link to cardiovascular disease, as we've really seen proven out by the SGLT inhibitors as well as the GLP-1s. And so for that reason, it's a huge issue. Now, what is sort of preventing us, if you like, from really tackling the scourge of cardiovascular disease? That's also multifaceted. I think uh, oftentimes cardiometabolic disease is somewhat asymptomatic. Looking at hypertension, for example, folks take their medicine and then they feel okay, despite the fact that their blood pressure is significantly elevated. And that's a huge risk for the development of heart failure, stroke, and MI, and lots of very poor consequences. Even with type 2 diabetes, a lot of the effects on blood sugar are somewhat asymptomatic. So there's this sort of inertia, both from a patient perspective, but also from a treating physician perspective, to be able to manage these diseases. Secondarily, you know, because it is a chronic disease, physicians and patients often take a somewhat conservative approach to treatment. They sort of, you're going to have this disease for a long time, or you have had this disease for a long time. And so the approach can be, well, we'll start you on this medicine. It's not the best, whether it be efficacy, and we'll try things along the way. The problem is that oftentimes those patients fall out from treatment due to lack of efficacy, not wanting to bother about it, etc. And really, the opportunity, I think, for the whole sort of cardiovascular, cardiometabolic community is to really, like we do with cancer, is to treat quite assertively and really take much more of a preventative approach to the development of some of these antecedents to downstream poor consequences like hypertension, like blood sugar, like hyperlipidemia, and taking a much more preventative approach to the management of these diseases. And interestingly, the US is pr- maybe even the tip of the iceberg, where the healthcare system is actually geared much more towards secondary intervention of high expense, highly technical medical care, and well removed from preventative treatment, which is where a lot of cardiometabolic disease can be mitigated. And then finally, if you take a much more public health global perspective, clearly there's an inability for us as a global community to really get these kinds of medicines to a lot of the patient populations who are skewed towards having cardiometabolic disease.
And you touched on this, I think, in the beginning, but really our understanding of diseases like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, has improved a great deal over the past decade, a couple of decades. And so, how is our understanding of the links between diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular disease? How has it evolved, and how does it continue to evolve? And what does that mean for future treatments?
So I think it's really evolved in a couple of ways. I think one, by virtue of the fact that some medicines that were originally intended to treat diabetes actually showed great outcomes from a cardiovascular perspective. So, for example, the SGLT inhibitors, the inhibitors of sodium glucose transporters, not only reduce blood sugar, your blood glucose, but it turns out that they also have great consequences on heart failure and the development of cardiovascular disease. And this was likewise currently, it's a very contemporary readout, as we're seeing all of the GLP-1 data come through and show that by reducing diabetes, reducing obesity, that you're going to get improvements, significant improvements in cardiovascular disease. It makes sense, of course. It's kind of logical that you reduce obesity and diabetes, that you get this reduction in cardiovascular events. But likewise, as I mentioned earlier, the biology actually is showing a homology between cardiovascular, and endocrine, particularly as it relates to diabetes and obesity. And one example is something in our portfolio, which is called sotagliflozin. It's an SGLT1 and 2 inhibitor. SGLT2 inhibitors are found in the kidney, and they block the reabsorption of glucose back into the kidney, and therefore you excrete glucose and reduce your diabetic load. But SGLT1 receptors are actually found on the myocardium. And so using our particular medicine, you're seeing impact on both the kidney, the peripheral impact, but also directly within the cardiovascular system. And really, that sort of homology of biology is bringing these two fields of medicine together. And now I think they're inextricably linked and will be studied for quite some time as one interactive system.
And coming to Lexicon Pharmaceuticals, of course, how is the company positioned to address cardiometabolic diseases in today's current landscape, with the current understanding, with the current landscape of drug development, and with the advent of drugs like GLP-1 medicines? And so what is the mission and goals, to say, of Lexicon Pharmaceuticals, and where is it positioned in the landscape?
So Lexicon is coming up on its 30th birthday. Can you believe it's been around since the turn of the century, actually. And you think back to what was happening back in the mid to late 90s, and that was really the revelation of the description of the human genome. And at that time, the founders of Lexicon, who came out of Baylor University, had this pretty audacious plan, and that is that they would take 5,000 genes that were homologous between the human and the mouse, that they deemed potentially druggable and related to medicine, and create knockout mouse lines of all of these genes. And so, out of that program, which was an incredibly ambitious program, they discovered about 200 genes that had incredibly significant impact in health and disease. And it just so turned out that many of these targets, the genes that they knocked out, had impact in cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, etc. The interesting thing about this particular approach way back then is that you end up with a phenotype. So very early on, you knock out the gene, and you can see that the mouse got fatter and fatter and fatter. Or if they knocked the gene out, that they could prevent that. And so, you fast forward that now over the years, and we've become a fully integrated company where we've integrated the chemistry to discover new medicines against these targets in a range of cardiometabolic diseases, and really diseases that are on the sort of cutting edge, the leading edge of new development. So, in particular, we've talked about obesity a lot already in this podcast. So, we actually licensed out our novel obesity target to one of the big innovators in this area, Novo Nordisk, earlier this year. This is a drug that actually acts synergistically with semaglutide and adds additional weight loss, and is an oral medicine where really we see the field of obesity management for both Lilly, Novo, and others turning to oral medicines and combinations of different mechanisms of action. So that's really exciting. At the same time, this SGLT1 and 2 inhibitor that we have called sotagliflozin already is indicated in heart failure. We continue to pursue an indication in type 1 diabetes, glycemic control for type 1 diabetes. Keep in mind, there's really been nothing in type 1 diabetes since the advent of insulin 120 years ago to manage their glucose. So that would be an amazing development for the company, and we continue to work with the FDA on that. and are currently working in a field called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Another area, it's another one of these areas in cardiometabolic medicine where there's been very little done over the last 20 years. And now we have this opportunity to bring new medicines for these patients who so desperately need them. And as you mentioned up front, we have a late stage asset looking at diabetic peripheral neuropathic pain, which is a huge unmet need for people with diabetes. A third of folks with diabetes will go on to form some sort of neuropathy, and it's really quite a debilitating disease. And likewise, there's really been nothing for about 20 years that have been developed for these patients apart from oral opioids. And we all know that there's a lot of political and social will to try and find alternatives to opioids across the US and worldwide. So that's a really fascinating drug that we're soon to meet with the FDA for our end of phase 2 meeting, looking to kickstart the final pivotal trials in 2026. So really, we've got a portfolio of early stage, mid and late stage trials that are really targeting a number of cardiometabolic issues that have for a long time been underserved. And that's that transformation that we talked about really upfront in the podcast of now that we've seen success in bringing medicines to market in cardiometabolic disease, that there's a lot more that we know we can and should do.
And bringing medicines for cardiometabolic diseases to market, what is involved in that process today in terms of, in the context of regulatory changes, pressures, financing? As we all know, of course, that the biotech industry has had a lot of ups and downs in the last one or two decades or so, and so. How is the industry doing today? And within that context, how is the process of bringing a drug to market been impacted or being impacted by those kinds of considerations?
Yeah, well, finances are always top of mind of a CEO's thought process. But look, for Lexicon specifically, and to a degree for the industry generally, I think we're in good shape. I think there's still great science, not only in cardiometabolic disease but across the industry, and there's plenty of investors who want to be a part of biotech. So despite the pressures, I think there is still a very buoyant industry. Clearly, there's still a very buoyant industry in the US, which is important. But at the same time, as you mentioned, it's important that regulators evolve and look to take different approaches. And I think we're seeing that with the FDA. And one example in cardiometabolic disease where really the FDA is becoming, or a couple of examples where they're looking to become much more patient centric and focus on things that matter to patients and do so. And by doing so, actually accelerate trials. In our study of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, the primary endpoint is really focused on patient symptoms and how they feel, something called KCCQ, which is really what patients tell us they're concerned about. Patients with HCM, they feel fatigued, they have no energy, they can't do their daily tasks, and it's really this big issue that inhibits their life, and they really want some relief from. And so our study has this as a primary endpoint, which really I think is a very pragmatic and sensible approach to making sure that we have the evidence to say that this drug is effective, but it not only focuses on what the patient wants, but has the potential to accelerate approval of this trial. And another example is really in diabetes, where the FDA is really looking at not only HbA1c as being a primary endpoint for diabetic trials, but are looking at the time in range. We now have continuous glucose monitors that can tell us how tight someone's glucose is from the peaks and troughs. And that's very important to physicians and patients. And, they're reconsidering taking that as a potential primary endpoint. So we are seeing, I think, good proactivity in the FDA. We need to see more. We need to work together with the FDA industry and the FDA, and I think the new commissioner and the approach that he is taking is facilitating that.
Thank you so much for those insights. And I wanted to get your insights into your experience. I think I mentioned in the beginning, from big pharma to now at a smaller biotech like Lexicon, and really what learnings have you taken from a Novartis, Eli Lilly, and then bringing those experiences and now leading Lexicon? And what are the differences, of course, in the landscapes of big pharma versus smaller biotech? And we're also seeing a lot more collaboration happening as well, of course, between big pharma and biotechs. And so what are the advantages of working at a place like Lexicon over a bigger pharma and vice versa?
Yeah, that's a great question. And indeed, I've been blessed to not only work in big pharma and now in biotech, but work across different geographies, which is also sort of colored and flavored, if you like, the way that I've gone about my business. The huge benefit that you have working in a large company like Eli Lilly, like Novartis, is the scale and resource that they can bring to bear on any particular program. And you know, uh, you you've seen time and time again the quality of work, the rigor that takes place in these companies that really can scale up any particular challenge that comes to them, and that is something that really companies of that size have a huge advantage in. Now, at the same time, the shadow side of that is bringing a lot of resources to bear often makes things a little more bureaucratic, a little slower, perhaps. Decisions don't get made because you have huge committees that are making those decisions, as opposed to a small company like Lexicon, where uh, because we've got such an expert, capable team, we can really put decision making into the within the organization rather than it always coming up to a committee and a group of people to make decisions. It means we can operate really fast, we can make great decisions, we can communicate easily, and so for that reason it has a lot of benefits for trying new things quickly. That helps a lot of innovation, and I think really what we're seeing now with the sort of increasing rate of licensing and M&A that is really sort of starting to reactivate is that you get this synergy between the two companies. And our deal that we did with Novo was a great example of that. We discovered a mechanism that no one else in the world had discovered. We've got a new medicine for that target, AAK1, with obesity, and Novo probably would never have discovered it. But now that we're partnering with them on that program, they bring the expertise, the scale, the resourcing to bear to really drive that program forward. So I think you're right. This synergy between the two, taking advantage of the best of both worlds, is a sweet spot in many instances.
Indeed, I love how you put that in terms of the synergy being uh, mutually beneficial, and really, if you can hit that sweet spot, I think that's a win-win for everyone, and ultimately, of course, for the patients as well, right? So,
Exactly.
um, and so, what can we expect from Lexicon Pharmaceuticals in the coming year and beyond in the next couple of years? What are some of the significant milestones that you're most excited about, and what can we keep our eye out for here at Xtalks, and of course our audience tuning in as well?
Yeah, so lots chronologically, perhaps, we're going to meet with the FDA very soon to close out the end of phase 2 meeting for this pain program, diabetic neuropathy, and we expect to start up phase 3 in 2026. We're actually looking to partner that program as well with someone who has the capability and scale to make sure that when we have that in a commercial model, that they can reach patients that desperately need relief from diabetic peripheral neuropathic pain. We continue our program with the FDA to look at type 1 diabetes for sotagliflozin. Next year, we will complete the enrollment for the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy study. And so that offers great promise at the end of 2026 into 27 of being a really new and novel medicine for HCM. And then we continue to work with our partners, both Viatris for our medicine sotagliflozin outside of the US and Europe, where we're bringing that medicine to patients with heart failure at the moment, and continuing on with Novo and really generating clinical data for this anti-obesity asset, a first-in-class mechanism that really could be a great addition to the armamentarium in obesity. So lots going on for a small company, and look out for us at the end of this year and into 2026. It's going to be a beauty.
We absolutely will. Dr. Exton, thank you so much for your time, for your insights, and for, importantly, all of the important, significant work that you're leading in the field. We wish you all the best, and we're definitely going to keep an eye out for all of those milestones and everything coming out of Lexicon. So thank you so much once again.
It's been a pleasure. Great to speak with you.
Likewise. All right, that's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. If you liked today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week. Bye for now.
To join the Xtalks community, visit xtalks.com and register for exclusive access to curated content like live webinars, news articles, and educational videos. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers sharing them and should not be taken as professional advice, nor do they necessarily reflect the policy or position of Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com.